All right, what's up, Shellheads? Welcome back to Turtles 101. We are here for season 2 of the famed 1987 cartoon series. Now, if you missed the first episode of our review of this series, you can find it in the playlist for Turtles 101. But in a nutshell, we are introduced in a very fast paced 5 episode miniseries introduction. We are introduced to Shredder, Krang, the Turtles, Splinter, Bebop, Rocksteady, April, and basically the world of 80s New York. And we left off with Shredder being transported to Dimension X with Krang in a climactic battle that seemingly saw the Turtles win. But of course, we know that there are 10 seasons of this series, so we know the story is not over yet. So let's crack into season 2. I'm going to go through the episodes, give a bit of a synopsis. You can find, though, the entire series either here on YouTube or Nickelodeon just picked up the rights for showing the entire 87 series, so you can watch it for yourself. I'm going to go through the episodes and then share some of my final thoughts at the end.
Turtle power, baby! Cowabunga!
So we kick off with the return of Shredder. Now, Shredder returns from Dimension X, though this time without the aid of Krang, his foot soldiers, or Bebop and Rocksteady. This very much puts Shredder as a subservient role to Krang. Krang is the more powerful of the two, and so Shredder is in this situation where everything is being held from him until he can prove himself. So, in a desperate plea to defeat the Turtles, he forms the Crooked Ninja Turtle Gang. Basically, 80s teens distilled down into cartoon form. Anything that you watch that shows teenage rebels from the 80s, you're going to see familiar notes here. Just a little more lighthearted. This is also very much how the teens are depicted in the 1990 movie. Just in the 90s movie, well, I should say in the 90s movies, it's all done with a darker tone, both visually and tonally. But still that same spirit of rebel youths being depicted, and April needs to help the Turtles basically clear their name and bring down the bad guys because the Crooked Turtle Gang is imitating the Turtles and basically framing them for a whole bunch of crimes. This is very much in the same spirit of Spider-Man, where you have the head of the newspaper, the news station, depicting the Turtles as this menace, and a reporter helping to try and clear the name. And so if you are a fan of those story beats of Spider-Man, this one is absolutely for you. This isn't a bad reintroduction into the series. It gets the ball rolling, albeit through some clunky exposition, getting the characters where they need to be, all of those kinds of things. Though I will say it helps to establish Krang as kind of a busy warlord in certain regards. He's very much it probably is the most generous to Krang's character as a whole. And so from this point, we move on to the incredible shrinking turtles. We have a staple in animation culture, especially from this time, a shrinking episode. They're done to varying degrees of effectiveness, This one's fine. And I think you're going to hear that a lot, that these are fine. This is very much a season of once you've seen one, you've seen them all. But after an alien spaceship crashes in Central Park, both the Turtles and Shredder are in a race to collect 3 fragments of the power source of the spacecraft, the Eye of Sarnath. When united, the Eye can give the wielder unlimited power. Again, guys, we're watching a cartoon from the 80s. Unfortunately for the Turtles, Shredder locates the first fragment first and uses it to shrink the Turtles. And now only Splinter can rescue his students from Shredder and Baxter Stockman. You know, I can appreciate the fact that they gave Splinter something to do, more than just get kidnapped, more than just be the plot device. If you watched the Mutant Mayhem review that we did here on the channel, you'll know I am a fan of Splinter being showcased as the master, and this very much does that. So I can appreciate that, and I can appreciate the villain getting the better of his enemies in physical combat, right? And so this is one that some of the moving parts I can appreciate more than just this is another shrinking episode. The one thing I will say is Shredder escapes in the end, and so, with the fragment, so the Turtles can't be returned to normal just yet. So again, we see at this point, Krang is probably at his height as a warlord versus just being Shredder's partner and, you know, a mad scientist at worst. So I can appreciate where this is at this point in the story. From here, we move to It Came From Beneath the Sewers. After accidentally misplacing the first fragment of Sarnath, Shredder and Baxter Stockman have to hunt down the piece all over again. So we're back to square one. Inspecting the fragment at greater length, they learn that it also has the weird ability to cause plants to grow into giant man-eating monsters. And so Shredder unleashes his killer plant into the sewers, hoping to devour the Turtles. You know, I think that this is something that shows, I think it's this season shows the idea of how far can we go with one particular plot line before the kids get bored? You know, how long can we stretch this out? And it sounds like I'm not being overly generous to this version of the Turtles or this season. Guys, I am a big fan. This is what got me into the Turtles. Even the Turtles at their worst, I'm still a fan of, which I don't think that this is the Turtles at their worst, but I have to call it out for what it is. So we have this kind of unfocused episode that almost feels stream of consciousness, right? Almost like writer Larry Parr is sitting at his typewriter and just going, right? Starting and not stopping, right? You know what would be great? A carnival setting. Yeah. And then the Turtles have to pretend to be clowns. Yeah. Wait, I've got something better. A man-eating plant. You know what I mean? It is what it is. I say all of that, but I honestly think it adds a charm to the episode. I definitely felt like this was height of Turtles, watching cartoons as a kid, cereal in hand, the whole 9 yards. I was very much brought back at this point. So even after they get the fragment back, the killer plant conflict is subdued until about the last 2 or 3 minutes of the episode. And the bulk of the second half revolves around Shredder kidnapping April for no apparent reason and the turtles saving her by throwing pizzas at him.
Pizza power!
And so here's the thing, right? They're able to get to a point where things are wrapped up in a way that is for the generation and for the time. And so with that, we move on to the Mean Machines. Locating the second fragment of the Eye of Sarnath, Shredder and Baxter learn that it has the ability to control all machines. So they use it to power a supercomputer called Omnis, Omnis. They seize control of every scrap of electronics in New York City. And so this very much is in line with dystopian sci-fi technological storytelling that was very prevalent in the 80s and 90s. And so this one was very much in tone with that, and I can appreciate that. Fun facts: this episode is penned by Michael Reeves, who would go on to pen many of the most memorable episodes of shows like The Real Ghostbusters, Batman the Animated Series, and Gargoyles. Unfortunately, this episode is not among some of his strongest, but that's okay. This is very much another staple of animation of the time, and that I can appreciate. This probably gets pacing back to a point where it's the most linear that we've seen so far out of the season. So with that, we move on to the Curse of the Evil Eye. We have finally found the third and final fragment. Shredder finally constructs the Eye of Sarnath, fusing it to his helmet. He gains the power to mentally transmute matter into anything that he can think of. And so, having endured enough of the mistreatment, Baxter Stockman hatches a scheme. He's going to steal the eye. All the while, we have a down on his luck news van driver that sets his sights on the eye as well. And in the middle of it all are the turtles, the only ones who know that the eye will self-destruct in only a matter of hours. This is the rare occasion where Shredder takes off his helmet during the episode. Fun facts. So, the Eye of Sarnath story arc comes to a conclusion here. And the interesting thing about this 4-episode arc is this would also be used elsewhere. This almost beat for beat story plot would be used in other animated series going forward. So if this sounds familiar, it's likely because you've seen it elsewhere, beat for beat. Basically going from collect the MacGuffin to a shrinking episode to an evil computer episode to it's all gonna self-destruct. It happens. But the Curse of the Evil Eye is still a satisfactory conclusion to the Sarnath arc, though the resolution's kind of sloppy at some points. Donatello basically just pulls a, hey, by the way, the eye is going to blow because I just remembered it right in the right time. And so essentially, the most important part of this episode, other than wrapping up this arc, is that Baxter is finally taking some initiative and betrays Shredder. So after 5 episodes of him being the subservient bad guy, you can see him kind of get some revenge. I like Baxter Stockman as a villain. I think he's a very compelling character. And so I'm always happy to see him be at his best. And so while the Curse of the Evil Eye marks the end of this season's largest continuous story arc and the last story arc that we really see until the 3-episode finale of season 3, there's still a pretty consistent continuity between the remaining episodes of season 2. Even if they're villain of the week in certain regards, but that's okay. I'm not opposed to a solid villain of the week storytelling. So with that, we move on to the case of the killer pizzas. So after obtaining monster eggs native to Dimension X, Shredder and Baxter Stockman disguise them as meatball pizza toppings and serve them to the turtles. The eggs eventually hatch, and the alien-like creatures quickly grow to humongous size. So honestly, this is probably one of my favorites. It's pretty focused. It's pretty singular. We're not jumping around subplots. I think that this is fun storytelling a la Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. For those of you that are of a particular vintage, you remember Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. Or Little Shop of Horrors. I just think it's fun. And so this is just a fun romp that closes out the first half of this 10-episode season, which brings us into Enter the Fly. After being vanquished and secluded to Dimension X in exchange for Bebop and Rocksteady, Baxter Stockman is sent to his execution by Krang. A malfunction, however, fuses Baxter Stockman with a stray fly. I remember I watched this, and I had also seen the movie The Fly. And this scene, as a small child, I did not like at all. I was not a fan. But this is where we get the famed Superfly fly version of Baxter Stockman. And from this point, Baxter then escapes to Earth to get revenge on both the Shredder and the Turtles. Shredder, meanwhile, has poisoned April with a rare plant, leaving the Turtles only hours to find the exotic antidote. I know I keep doing that, but again, it's very much these are beats that you see if you watch enough cartoons, which I'll just be honest, you can see around me. I've watched my fair share of cartoons. So we have this race against time to find the antidote. And, I know I said this about the last episode, but this for me is the height of the season. This for me is really where things are hitting at all cylinders. I think we're starting to get really flushed out characters. I think this is where personalities are coming out. I think this is really where we are at the height of the Turtles as this iteration. And I don't just mean that as the Heroes in the Half Shell. I mean all of them. And so easily this is the best episode of season 2 for me. And when you have two major plot threads that are happening simultaneously that don't muddle each other, instead one enhances the other, I thought that was chef's kiss. As far as this version of storytelling. And so at this point, Baxter is effectively written out of the series as a main antagonist. He will only make guest villain appearances for the remainder of the show's run. While a few of those Superfly episodes are pretty good, this is kind of the height of Baxter Stockman as a character. you'll see kind of a trend going forward where he's more or less a sci-fi cliche. And from this point, Bebop and Rocksteady finally take their rightful places as Shredder's right-hand stooges and remain there until the villain is written out of the series later on. It's weird that up until this point, Bebop and Rocksteady have hardly been seen from this point, other than brief cameos. This is their first major appearance since the first half of season 1. So in a way, I don't know, I enjoyed absence makes the heart grow fonder in certain regards. It was cool to see them included at this point. And so I can appreciate that this is a giant toy commercial and that we very much get a lot of toy slinging in this, but hey, whatever. It's the 80s, it happens. And so from this point, we move to Invasion of the Punk Frogs. Seeking to create an evil opposition to the Ninja Turtles, Shredder uses a canister of the ooze to create punk frogs. Attila the Frog, Genghis Frog, Napoleon Bonafrog, and Rasputin the Mad Frog. Training them in martial arts, he uses them to steal chemicals that are necessary for the production of more mutagen. The turtles have to attempt to take down the punk frogs, but are quickly thwarted by Captain Hoffman and the anti-mutant task force. So this is the first of many attempts to create an evil counterpart to the Ninja Turtles. We did see it at the beginning of the season, but this is really where we see an evil quartet to pair against the Turtles. Even though the Punk Frogs didn't last very long as villains, being turned to the side of good by the end of their introductory episode. And so they do make a couple of reappearances in the series, but this is the height of their involvement in the story, which I liked. I liked them. They had a lack of individual personalities, but I appreciated what they were for what they were. So from this point, we move to Splinter No More. After devising a retro mutagen concoction, Donatello returns Splinter to his human form as Hamato Yoshi. Shredder, meanwhile, finds an ancient spell book that will allow him to open up gateways to other dimensions. When he opens up a gateway accidentally to a world of monsters, only Splinter, not Hamato Yoshi, can save the day. Honestly, I appreciated the fact that Michael Reeves put some nods into the animation for H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos. It was a wonderful adaptation of the Cthulhu mythos. I loved it. And so this is just a fun what if, kind of questioning what if he turned back into a human sort of thing. And we have Dimension X, so it would say that it would lend to logic that there are other ones as well. I like it. I think it's fine. I think it works for what it is. And so the one thing I do think is funny is this is another example of a trend that happened in the 80s where a lot of different ideas were used and reused, but not outright stated for what they were. Like Turtles literally came as a byproduct of Daredevil. Eastman and Laird were huge Daredevil fans, and the original non-licensed copy of the introduction of the Turtles actually said, you know what, copyrights, who never heard of her, let's go ahead and just make this as a side B to the story of Daredevil. and the mutagen that gives Daredevil his powers of enhanced sight that also took his eyesight is the same thing that created the turtles. And so this ancient spell book is not directly identified as the Necronomicon, but it's pretty close. It summons a giant tentacle monster that's not referred to as Cthulhu, but again, pretty close. So I don't know. I like it. I'm a huge Cthulhu fan. And so, well, I should say I'm a huge H.P. Lovecraft fan, as far as the Cthulhu mythos. So this one was for somebody like me. I was more of a fan of those portions of it than the questioning whether or not Splinter was going to forget about the turtles and all of that kind of stuff. So from that, we move to New York's Shiniest. While investigating a story about the NYPD's prototype robot police officer, April winds up forcibly saddled with a bodyguard in the form of a semi-functioning Rex 1. As April tries to get the robot cop to stop following her around, Shredder steals the machine's schematics and creates his own army of robots that are going to take over New York. This feels like a first draft, just to be honest. This feels like something that is very much out of the playbook of sci-fi in the 80s, robot cops. It's almost like there was a movie about that. I thought this was funny. I thought this was a funny episode. I think that this is one that has more to do with being a product of what this was. We have April and Splinter driving the party wagon down the street, encountering evil Rex clones. It's fun. It's funny. It's not a cohesive story, but that's not really what we're looking for out of these series. Like, this isn't one that, if you're looking for a continuous cohesive narrative, we'll get there in about 2003. I know that's not very popular, but this is more of a toy commercial than anything else. And so it's important to remember that the landscape of animation in the 80s was very different than it is today. And a vast amount of people were employed in it. So, this is more about that than it is about telling a hard-hitting story. So with that, we have teenagers from Dimension X. We have the return of the neutrinos, Zach, Dask, and Kala. They return to New York to warn the turtles of Krang's Mento Neutralizer, a device that saps the willpower from its victims. Shredder becomes intent on stealing their Starmobile for its interdimensional portal beam. And honestly, I just enjoy whenever we have reoccurring characters. I think that this is very much this is what's happening in Dimension X. This is very much telling us more about what's happening off camera to the characters that are on camera, and using characters that were already introduced into the Fred Wolf world. And I don't know, I dig it. I think that this is fun. I think that this very much shows that a lot of the same staff and a lot of the same scripts were given to shows like He-Man and Transformers and G.I. Joe. So some of the things come off as a little redundant in 2023. But, I think that this is everything that it needs to be, and showing the continuity of the series. I really appreciated it. And I appreciated the fact that they tried to develop the, I guess, romance between Michelangelo and Kala that was set up during the first season, that they didn't just forget about that. and they very much call the a road warrior Mad Max sort of feel during this one, which I greatly appreciated. So this is one that if you're a fan of the 80s style of storytelling, that was a big one. So from this point, we have the Catwoman from Channel 6. After inadvertently stepping into Shredder's matter transporter at the same time as a cat, April is transformed into a ferocious Catwoman. Shredder seizes the opportunity for revenge, fitting April with a mind control collar and sending her to hunt down Splinter in the sewer layer. So this is kind of the pinning of a character arc of sorts. Irma has been trying to meet the mysterious Ninja Turtles, and she finally gets to meet them in this episode, which is an interesting nod to continuity. This is, again, very 80s. It is a callback to a Japanese Turtles comic that this is an adaptation of. So there is that. This is an episode. Unfortunately, the episode centering around April age in a mixed bag. This is very much a product of its time and remains a product of its time, and it is what it is. I don't know how else to say it. So we have this as a story beat. April is returned to normal. However, when the effects of the transporter wear off, it makes the hunt for the cat meaningless. So finally, the transporter itself is destroyed by Bebop and Rocksteady without the turtles even being present. So, in effect, the villains, when they're left to their own devices, foil their own scheme without any protagonist involvement. It is what it is. So, from this point, we have the return of the Technodrome, i.e., the return of the toy commercial. I mean, this whole thing is a toy commercial, but a bunch of us had the Technodrome, just like we all had the Party Wagon. It is what it is. I literally have a Turtles figure off to my side over there. So it is what it is. The return of the Technodrome sees Krang, who's tired of waiting for Shredder to defeat the Turtles, make his way to conquer the Earth, which finally shows some initiative for the villains when he brings the Technodrome through the interdimensional portal. He's intent on dealing with the Turtles himself. As a war machine, it creates earthquakes to level Manhattan. And the Turtles have to find some way to shut down Krang and the Shredder for good. The season finales within this series are often the most notable episodes of the cartoon. They have the most going on. They have the most involvement of different characters, even if they're not necessarily the best well-written episodes. So they tend to be the most memorable for the habit of bringing back things like the Technodrome, which hasn't been seen at all this season. And so it's supposed to be this monumental thing that now it is back. And we finally get to see Shredder commanding the armies of foot soldiers and rock soldiers for the first time since season 1 ended. I mean, it's cool to see, but they very much have Stormtrooper effect to them. So they're not any more effective than Bebop or Rocksteady, to be honest, but it is what it is. So this season finale comes with Splinter referring to the final battle before they invade the Technodrome. And there are scenes that make it seem like the bad guys may have died. I don't know. I thought they did a good job of making it seem like there was an era of finality, even though there wasn't actually an era of finality. We're literally only wrapping up season 2. One last thing of note as we wrap up this season is Donatello shuts off Niagara Falls with a faucet. I'm going to leave that there. This is the series that we're in. So that wraps up season 2. And for all of its faults, what did I think? It had direction and continuity between the episodes. From this point, this is kind of the height of continuity in certain regards. And this was an interesting experience to binge, because I binge these and then I talk about them. This one was difficult because this is, I said it before and I'll say it again, this is very much a, once you've seen it, you've seen it. You've seen all of them. And so for better or for worse, this is one that this series can be a bit redundant, though. For this season, I liked the callbacks. I did think that there were definitely more hits than misses, and it was fun, even at its most redundant. So with that, friends, Shellheads, that brings season 2 to a close. I want you to sound off down in the comment section. Let me know if you're watching the series along with me. Let me know what you thought of season 2. Let me know what you thought about the series as a whole. Let me know what else you would like to see in Turtles 101. And until next time, Cowabunga Shellheads.